acquire it when you buy it. You pay for it in advance of when you need it. And when you get it, then a lot of times, at least it's the experience of people that I hear from, that should be, you call them up and they just keep you on the phone as long as possible in an effort to deny your claim. And I'm not saying everybody does that. I'm not saying it's every insurance company, but it's a lot. And if that happens, there then has to be somebody you appeal to. And I don't believe the Republicans who have advanced this idea would, I'm not speaking for them, but I believe that the last thing they would want is more federal regulation of our health insurance. So they're going to have to make a choice then, if they are going to do this on across state lines, they're going to have to figure out how different states are going to regulate their different markets, and how Colorado is going to regulate Texas or New York. That is a challenging issue. But I want to say again, there is no federal prohibition at all to people selling across state lines. The last point, because what was the other one? Medicare or negotiating of drug prices. Oh, and buying. Oh, the other was the actuary. So we can certainly look at that and see. We want to make sure that as much of what you're getting from your insurance that you buy are benefits that that you're getting instead of overhead that they're receiving. We try to do some of that in the Affordable Care Act, and maybe we can do more. I believe the government should be able to negotiate drug prices, particularly Medicare, to negotiate drug prices. Today, it can't negotiate drug prices, and the result of that is people are starting to think about things like, well, maybe we should buy our drugs from Canada because their pricing is much lower. The pricing in Canada, of course, is based on the Canadian single-payer healthcare system. So the minute we started buying those drugs, it would completely upend the way Canada does its pricing of drugs, which there's some other issues with it too. But my view is this: why should Americans have to go to another country to buy drugs at a reasonable price? And why should Americans why should Americans have to settle for hollowed out insurance policies that are these so-called catastrophic policies that, yeah, give you insurance in the sense that you've paid for something called insurance, but when you need it, it's not there for you. And no one else in the industrialized world settles for that. So the idea that providing that and somehow calling that a choice or an expansion or more access is something that no one else in the industrialized world has to settle for. Just like no one else. I had a meeting yesterday before I left. You'll be interested that we had these snowstorms. I said I'd give you short answers. I apologize. But we had these I'm trying to anticipate some questions in my answer. But we had snowstorms in Washington. It won't surprise you to know that every single meeting that I had that was scheduled with Coloradans, they kept the meeting. Every single meeting that was Washington, D.C. people, they canceled the meeting. But one of the meetings was with a woman who's come to my office before. She comes in on an annual basis to advocate for people in our state that have colorectal cancer, which is the second largest killer of people. And she gave me her pitch, which she has done before, and then somebody else gave me theirs. And I said, well, you know, I'm thinking about and worrying about this proposal on health care that's in the House right now. And she started to cry in the office. And she said, I have lost my insurance because I've lost my job. I'm a single mother. I can't afford to buy insurance, which means that I can't get the annual colorectal screen that I need to know that I'm not having cancer anymore. That doesn't happen in any other industrialized country in the world. And so my hope is that I don't believe there's any way that this plan that Paul Ryan has suggested is going to pass the Senate. I'm not even sure it'll pass the House of Representatives. But I hope when we're done with this exercise, what we can do, and people who are critical of the Affordable Care Act by saying there were no Republican votes, I take that criticism. I understand that criticism. Now's the time for us to come together in a bipartisan way and say, hey, let's address these issues for the American people and for people that are in Colorado. That's
Ms. Wynn is up. Barb Felty, you're on deck, and let's play like baseball. Morgan Chavez in the hall.
You know what's awesome about this crowd is that almost every meeting I have to say after about the second person, hey, let's go boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. But that's not going to be a problem here.
Well, I just wanted to say hi again.
Hi
I was
again.
at your meeting for the
Thank you.
Representative. Had a great discussion that night. Really appreciated the time you took with us. Today, I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've been doing, stand up for us. Thank you for coming. This one thing I said during our meeting was, please come.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Crazy because she's lived a good life. She's been an American. You know, we've done everything right that we can, and we're going to be bankrupt. She's going to be bankrupt, and she's going to be on Medicaid, and there's not going to be Medicaid. So what do we want to do?
So first of all, thanks. It's nice to see you again. And not to, it's another refrain, but in the context of making America great again and all that, you know, again, you don't go bankrupt over health care in other countries in this world. You shouldn't go bankrupt over health care here. Medicaid, we do have huge issues with our budget, and I want to say that. I don't believe the Democrats take that seriously enough. I think the Republicans talk about fixing it, but they don't fix it. And both of us together need to find a way to fix it. But having said that, one of the problems that I have with the health care bill that's been, let me just make a critique of Obamacare first, which is this. I meet people in rural Colorado who say to me, Michael, look, you're making us buy health insurance now. We didn't used to have to buy health insurance. You're making us buy health insurance. It costs a lot of money. And because of what I make, let's say I'm a housing contractor in Routt County, that's a good example. Because of what I make, I don't qualify for the subsidies. So you're making me buy something expensive. And because of these guys have no competition where I live, the insurance companies, the deductible is ridiculous. So if anything happens to me, I have to pay for that anyway, or to my family. And so why are you forcing me to buy something that's not of use to me and my family? You know what? Fair criticism. We should fix that problem. But that's not what this bill does. What this bill does, you've seen the numbers, reduces coverage by 24 million Americans. It cuts taxes for the very highest level of Americans. And it cuts Medicare by about $900 billion. And that's been described as a fiscally responsible act. What it's actually doing is shifting Medicaid from the federal government to states and local governments who have to make the decision, what do we do with the people that were served by Medicaid? One decision would be to throw them off, just stop. That's a decision. Over half the births in America are paid for by Medicaid. Over half the people in our state that are on Medicaid are children. Are they supposed to go to work? And a whole bunch of the people that are on Medicaid are people like, hopefully your mom won't find herself in this situation, but are people who, because of the way our rules work, have had to spend down their entire life savings for the privilege of being on Medicaid in a nursing home. Are we really going to throw those people off of Medicaid? And then the huge majority of people that are left are people that are working but are being paid so little in their job that they can't afford health insurance. And so they're on Medicaid, which, by the way, Ryan and others are right about this, doesn't sufficiently reimburse doctors to cover their costs. So, again, we should live in a world where you don't have the kind of lack of predictability you're talking about, where where getting health care and keeping health care is not a full-time job for people, so that parents can go to work instead of worrying all the time about whether their kids have health care or whether their parents have health care as well. And again, we should go to work on that together. Sorry.
Thank you. Next question is from Barb Felty, followed by Morgan Chavez and Tyler Van Kirk, or Van Cork.
Senator Bennet, I'm from Guthrie, Colorado, it's a small rural town west of here. My first question is from our librarian, who the way Park County works, and especially for rural areas, is that they keep the hours below 19 hours for a rural librarian and pay a very minimal wage. So she's on health care for the first time. She's concerned that she's going to lose that. She's healthy, very healthy, in her late 40s. But she was wanting to know if there's any way to protect people that are in her situation with minimal work hours and a salary, who can now buy insurance. How's that going to affect them?
Well, I think, first of all, in her specific case, I would need to understand more about whether this was the school district rule or the federal government's rule. So,
It's the Park County.
or okay, Park County's library system rule. So that's I probably have very little to say about that, except to try to do what we can do to make sure that we're continuing to create as much access as possible for people, especially in rural areas, which is the toughest part of Colorado, where people that are living in long distances from places, and where there aren't primary care doctors in many cases, there aren't primary care nurses in other cases. So if you give your name to my staff, though, I'll make sure we'll follow up on the specific case. Thank you.
My second question is from my daughter, who is a special education teacher. She was wondering, since Colorado's Constitution doesn't allow vouchers for religious schools, how is the Betsy DeVos plan going to affect us, and especially her in special ed?
So it's a great question. Please thank her for teaching. I am as strong a proponent of school choice as a lot of people you'll find out there. And as superintendent of Denver Public Schools, I supported it. We have high-performing charter schools. We have high-performing non-charter schools. We have learned from our own mistakes and our experiences to create the fastest-growing urban school district in America. It would graduate and sent to college 60% more kids this year than in 2005. So I have seen the possibilities of reforming our school districts in ways that make sense. I've never supported vouchers because I think that thinking of education as a marketplace of individual people doesn't take account of what's actually going on in the ground, and rural schools are exactly one of the reasons why. Your daughter is already trying to do her job without the federal government actually committing to pay for the IDEA, the special ed statute that we wrote. So we have all these requirements and unfunded mandates we're asking your daughter to meet, and she's not getting paid to do that as it is. If the money starts to be voucherized, there'll be even less of an opportunity for her to do it. And I think what you will see is a bipartisan coalition of Republicans and Democrats coming together to stop what the Department of Education is suggesting that they want to do.
Morgan Chavez, Tyler Van Cork, you're on deck, and Lonquillos Gonzalez Jr. in the hole.
I don't know what happened to people on this side of the room.
I'll dig deeper in the box next time. Morgan Chavez.
Hey, Morgan.
My question today is, I am a mother, I have 2 daughters. There are so many things that I'd like to get your opinion on, but it all boils down to the same issue. You know, we want to talk about healthcare, we want to talk about education, and we want to talk about the budget, and we want to talk about Russia, and we want to talk about all these things. But what it boils down to is, what are the Democrats and what are you specifically going to do to resist the Trump administration rules that are frightening my children?
Well, for me, as a parent as well, my standard for myself is what are we doing to advance the aspirations we have for our kids and our grandkids? That's, to me, what it all boils down to. And if we spent our time in committee hearings and on the floor in the Senate having to answer that question first, in other words, is this going to do something useful for our kids and our grandkids and for this country and our role in the world, or is this going to be counterproductive? And that's the lens through which we're going to look at it. Not that we don't have disagreements. Obviously, we have disagreements. I think that would push us in the direction that we need to go in terms of the discussion that we've had. I have long believed that D.C. was decoupled. Washington's priorities were decoupled from America's priorities and from Colorado's priorities. I've long believed that. I would not have imagined that the remedy for that would have been Donald Trump. But that is where we find ourselves. And I am going to continue. I believe that people send us to Washington to get things done for them. And I think they should have a reasonable expectation that we're getting things done for them. And where I can work with Republicans and Democrats to do that, I will. And my track record is that I have. And I don't believe that principled compromise with somebody who comes from a different state or a different political party or has a different point of view is selling out my values or my principles. In fact, I think there's evidence going back to the very founding of this country where the people had profound disagreements, and yet, in the end, they were able to find the greater good. That's, I think, what I would like to help us do is find the greater good. Now, when it comes to respect, thank you. But I do think that when somebody is in that office and they are attacking the independent judiciary in this country, somebody's in that office and they are attacking, and this is very important to me personally, the free press. And they're saying things like, they are saying things like the press is not covering terrorist acts, and then the press has to go out and put on the front page of their newspapers hyperlinks that demonstrate that they have covered these terrorist acts, including the very ones that the White House has delineated, when you know that there are journalists who have been beheaded in the Middle East because they've been trying to bring us the story of what's going on with Syria, what's going on with ISIS. That's a place where I think my voice needs to be heard. And I think it's also true with respect to this refugee ban, which is, even in its second incarnation, has now been stopped by 2 courts that have looked at it, and the attacks that have been made on immigrants. Now, I'm not even talking about what happened before the election. I'm talking about what's happened since. So sign me up for working with people where I can. Sign me up for protecting principles and defending American traditional principles that I very much agree with. But I'm not going to be one of these people who says, I'll never work with you just because you're a Republican. Or I'm never going to work with you just because you're Donald Trump. I voted for about half of his nominations, and I voted against about half of them. And I'm making a judgment on each one about whether they can be evaluated. So what I would say to all of you is, keep it coming. Your phone calls are making a difference. Your postcards are making a difference. Showing up is making a difference. People who have been in the Congress for 30 years, thank God I'm not one of those, have told me they've never seen anything like this. And I think that's going to give us the chance to change our politics in ways that are going to create more opportunity for the people that are coming after us, which is an objective that you and I both share.
Congressman Quirk is up, followed by our newest county commissioner, Longinos Gonzalez Jr., followed by Mary Byer. Good
afternoon, Senator. My name is Tyler Van Kirk. I'm here representing Food and Water Watch. And we, along with millions of Coloradans, are very concerned about this administration's assault on our air, our water, and our environment. Now, we know that this is something that you're concerned about as well. You've said publicly many times that you're concerned about climate change. You know it's impacting Colorado. We're a state whose water supply is also under threat from a changing climate, from spills and accidents, from fracking and oil and gas development. And now we have a Trump administration that's coming in looking to totally gut the budget of the EPA and roll back regulations that are there to protect people, to protect our health. So what I would like to know is that will you commit to voting against any budget that slashes funding for the EPA? And will you commit to oppose any regulatory rollbacks that are going to harm our air, our water, and our environment?
Yeah, and I already have them. I also, having said that, am very sympathetic to people because I used to be on the receiving end when I was the superintendent of schools, and in business to a degree, but certainly when I was superintendent of public schools, I was on the receiving end of everybody's great, bright idea in Washington, D.C. about how we should teach our kids. And they were really well-intentioned. I always wondered when I was superintendent why everybody in Washington was so mean to our kids and our teachers. And I went back there and found out they weren't mean. They just have absolutely no idea what's going on in our schools and our classroom. And I hear some of the same stuff from our farmers and ranchers who say, it feels to me like I can never send back a signal to Washington that says, when you tell me I got to put my storage tank here and it's expensive and it's not going to really help accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, can I have the chance to just say, hey, maybe it should go here because it might be cheaper and it might better accomplish what you want to accomplish. I'm not a person who says we have to support every regulation that's out there. I'm willing to look at things that don't make sense anymore. What I'm not going to support is a 30% cut to the EPA that particularly is focused on all the work that's being done around climate science at that agency. And it is an unhappy circumstance, to say the least, that we now have in charge of that agency somebody who has said, took the opportunity right after he was approved for the job to say that he doesn't believe that climate change is real and he doesn't believe that humankind is contributing to it. The science is settled on that question. What we do about it is unsettled, and there's plenty of room for debate on that too. You can debate whether climate change is real too. Obviously, it's your right as people that are protected, thank goodness, by the First Amendment in this country, but probably not if you're head of the EPA. That's probably not the place you want to be. And people have come to me often and they've said, Michael, we're glad you supported that clean water thing. We're glad you supported that clean air thing. Thank you for being brave about it. And what I say to them is, what I know is that the Republican moms in Douglas County, Colorado, believe in clean water and clean air. They do. And that somehow the talking points in D.C. becomes this difference between Democrats and Republicans on the issue. We may have a difference in emphasis on regulation on the issue, but we don't have a disagreement on clean water and clean air. I had not read the whole president's budget, but one of the things I saw this morning as I was coming in was that he's cutting agriculture by 22%, is what I read. And in that, he's also cutting the Division of Forestry. Last year was the first time in the history of America that the Forest Service budget, over half of it was consumed fighting fires. Not doing the fire mitigation that Colorado Springs needs us to do. Not doing the fire mitigation that everyone who lives downstream of Colorado's national forests needs us to do. I tell my colleagues all the time, if you're downstream of Colorado, and almost everybody is, you need to worry about what's happening at the headwaters of your streams. And what's happening at the headwaters of your streams is that forests are dying and decaying because of climate change. And we see it, and because of the beetles that have resulted because of climate change. So we should be investing more heavily on the front end to say, the stupidest thing you could do from a financial perspective would be to say, we're not going to do any mitigation on the front end, we're just going to wait till the forest is on fire. And I don't need to tell a single person in that room that. You know it from your own experience here in El Paso County. This budget doesn't reflect it. So again, what I also hope is that this gives us an opportunity to demonstrate that there is in fact a consensus in America, A, that climate change is real and we need to do something about it, and B, that we're prepared to re-engineer a 21st century energy economy right here in Colorado and right here in America. We don't have to wait for other people to do that for us. And if we don't do it, they will do it. And so in addition to committing to you that I will fight for our clean water and clean air, I'm going to commit to you to fight for Colorado's economy in the face of budgets and other policies that strike me as job-killing policies, not policies that are going to support good paying jobs here in our state.
Before we go to the next question, a quick housekeeping item. If you haven't already done so, pull your phone out, turn the ringer off. It'll prevent disturbing other folks in the audience. So thank you for doing that. Next up, Senator Bennet, it's a pleasure to introduce our newest county commissioner,
Commissioner.
down the left side.
Congratulations.
Gonzalez Jr.
I do appreciate you being here, but I did want to, my question is going to be on the Supreme Court, but I did want to make one clarifying comment.
Sure.
On Obamacare, our state budget is being impacted by this. The expansion has gone, especially on the Medicaid, from 20% of the budget to 40% and greater of our budget. And that's keeping budget monies from going to our schools and to our transportation. So something does need to be done to fix Obamacare or replace it, but it needs to be addressed. But my question is on Judge Gorsuch. He was appointed by 100% of the Senate, does it include yourself, sir, to his current position. Do you support his appointment to the Supreme Court?
So on the first point, let me accept your clarification and offer another clarification, which was that the way this worked with the Affordable Care Act was the expansion of Medicaid was funded 90% by the federal government for a number of years. The Medicaid expansion before that was not, and you're right, over a long period of time, it's forced out our support, for example, of higher education. And that's one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why people in Colorado that go to our public universities on average are graduating with debt that's going to take them 22 years of their lives to pay back. And my view is that's totally unfair, because the previous generation didn't have to do that. I've not yet made a decision on how I'm going to vote. I appreciate your asking the question. The hearing starts next week. I want to hear, he's obviously he's been a judge here for a long time. Many people speak highly of him, particularly in the context that we're in today. I think it's very important to hear his testimony.
Mary Beyer is up next, followed by Barbara Snyder, and then Gwen Demuth.
Hi.
My name is Mary Beyer. I worked for the government for over 30 years. My husband's retired Air Force. He's in a nursing home with Alzheimer's. It costs $7,000 a month to keep him there out of pocket. Our retirement income is $6,000 a month. Our savings are going rather rapidly. So yes, health insurance is very, very important. I also believe on the ACA, everybody should contribute to their own care. It's just the way I think. But the proportions are just outrageous. You simply can't afford to have insurance. But my real question that I came about is the taxes. Since I worked for the government for over 30 years, I was in a very low-level position. I had precious little decision-making capability. Yet I was forced to fill out a form called the OGE 450. And I looked up the requirements. The president and the vice president are required to fill out these forms already per regulation. It's supposed to list my assets over $1,000. Same for the president. It's supposed to list specific stocks. It lists my income over $200. It lists my liabilities, like things I owe over $10,000. And that's for me, my spouse, and my dependent children. Where is this form for the president?
So this is called the OGE 450?
Yes.
Could somebody write that down so we got it? So if you may have found something and cracked the code, nobody said. And I will call them between here and Pueblo. I will be on the phone. I will say that I have co-sponsored a bill that says that presidents should have to make public their tax returns. I made 5 years of my tax returns. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. And it's not. I'm not picking on one person. I think they all ought to do it. And I think transparency in general is something that we should be willing to expect out of people. I also have deep concerns about the amount of money that's being spent as the Trump family kind of moves around, making money in his face. So these are all things we're paying attention to, and I do hope that there are some drain the swamp things that the president said he wanted to work with that I'd like to help him with. One in particular, which I've not been able to get any attention on in Washington, but I really believe in it, is a bill that I've had for 6 years that would say that if you have had the privilege of serving as a member of the House of Representatives or serving as a member of the United States Senate, you should be willing to accept a lifetime ban on ever becoming a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. It might give us a chance to work together on that, but we'll check on it and get back to you. Thank you. And
One tiny little follow-up. In addition to that, we have to be very careful to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Appearance of impropriety. And I believe that would be living in Trump Tower and renting back your own space for your own profit for public office.
Barbara Snyder, it's your turn for a question. Barbara Snyder, followed by Gwen DeMuth, and then Stephanie Rose.
First of all, Senator Bennett, I want to thank you for being here. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you about this. My concern is that we've seen some rather dramatic trends in politics right now. Some of it seems to have been as a result of the 2010 Citizens United decision. So we now are in a position as a people, as a country, where special interests of, the super wealthy have the ability to influence elections and candidates, as well as, I think, my belief is, people in Congress and on the courts. Okay? The Koch brothers seem to be a big part of that, and they've had that agenda for a long time. They seem to want to dispossess the people of minimum wage, health care, a lot of other things too, And so my question is, and this relates back to the one about Judge Gorsuch. He was in favor, he made a decision in favor of Hobby Lobby, which seems to me to have been a tacit, understanding or condoning that, corporations have rights to. And I don't think that that's what the Founding Fathers meant when they gave the people rights. They have groups of people, have a single agenda generally, especially if they are run by a super wealthy person. And so my question is, and I'd like to urge you, let me just say that, not to vote for Judge Gorsuch. Probably have a relationship with him because he's been in Colorado and you have to for a long time. Certainly you guys have, have a chance to, run across each other. But, I think that it's really important with that kind of a history for us to consider that he is only going to further the agenda of the Koch brothers and their $18 billion.
so thank you for your name again, Barbara. So thanks. I think we should, and have a seat, please. I think we should, did everybody hear enough of it? Let's listen to his answers on Hobby Lobby next week. I don't want to get into the weeds on that. I will tell you that, just for whatever it's worth, I know Merrick Garland, but much better than I know Neil Gorsuch, who was the guy that was appointed before, because he and I worked together. And interestingly enough, the time I'm not going to tell you what either of them said to me in my conversations with them, because it's up to them to say that. But I can tell you that I spent more time with them on Citizens United than I did on anything else. In fact, I reread the cases again on the flight back to D.C. last week to be prepared to have the conversation. And it actually goes back to your observation about transparency and the appearance of corruption. That's what when the Supreme Court decided Citizens United, I used to say that reading the majority opinion of Citizens United was like reading a 7th grader's American government paper describing our politics. And then I decided that that was insulting to 7th graders, so I don't say it anymore. But what the court fundamentally misunderstood our political system. And it's not surprising because there's nobody anymore on that court who's ever been in politics. I mean, I think if Sandra Day O'Connor, who was a Republican from Arizona, had still been on the court, they would have come to a very different answer. Because what they said was, we already have, what they did was define corruption as quid pro quo corruption. So you give me $5,000, I go write a bill that benefits you. And they said, we already have laws that punish that. You know, why do we need to restrain speech to do that? So we must not be dealing with corruption. What we must be dealing with is the appearance of corruption. And does that rise to enough of concern that we would want to erode the rights, in this case of billionaires, to contribute money to super PACs without telling anybody who they are? And their answer was, in a democracy, they had already defined money as speech, so they said in a democracy you can never have enough speech, so therefore these are unconstitutional restraints, and we strike down these bipartisan regulations. In a democracy, you can never have enough speech. If you define speech as money and money as speech, the corollary to that is, in a democracy, you can never have enough money. And I have yet to meet a single person in Colorado who thinks the problem with our politics is we don't have too much money in it. There isn't anybody who said, I want to see one more negative ad that somebody from out of state will not attach their name to. And what they really fundamentally misunderstood, so you can have a disagreement about that. I would say the appearance of corruption is important enough that you ought to be willing to put some limits on those First Amendment rights. Just like we say you can't yell fire in this theater because there are countervailing reasons and there's no amendment that's absolute. Somebody else might say, well, no, it's not. I believe more that the balance goes. That's what our democracy is about. That's what courts are about. What I can tell you for a fact, though, is that what we face in the United States Congress is not just the appearance of corruption, but actual corruption. And it's not the corruption of action. It's not you giving me $5,000 and my going to write a bill or hiding it in an icebox someplace and writing a bill. It's the corruption of inaction. It's speeches that people don't give, and bills they don't write, and climate stuff that doesn't get addressed because people are so worried if they say it out loud that somebody who can write a check for $20 or $30 million is going to drop it on their head when election time rolls around in the super PAC. That is what we are facing. So if you want to know why we have had the most dysfunctional Congress in modern American history, there are a number of reasons for it, but in my view, this is the single most important one, and we've got to get this money out of our political system somehow. Well, what do I think about an amendment to the Constitution? And by the way, I should also say, I think the founders would agree with you as well on this. I was the first co-sponsor. Tom Udall wrote an amendment to the Constitution. I'm not a big believer in meddling with our Constitution. This is one of those times when I feel like the court just missed it. They just missed it. It's a lack of experience. And by the way, why do they have that lack of experience? Why is everybody on the court only from 2 law schools? Why are they all people from who were Court of Appeals judges before they were on the court? And the reason is that it comes out of our dysfunctionality. Because if a president knows that somebody has gotten 100 votes before in the Senate, as the commissioner pointed out, well, that's somebody you're going to put back in front of the Senate, instead of looking for somebody with a range of experience. So this is also, and so I was the first co-sponsor of Tom Udall's amendment on the Constitution. I'm also a big supporter of the Disclose Act, which would require disclosure. 8 of 9 justices on the Supreme Court in Citizens United said that disclosure was constitutionally permissible. And I think I saw with interest that there's some people in the legislature in Colorado thinking about things Colorado could do to say, we don't want that money in our state if we can avoid that money. We got to fix this problem before we can fix the rest of everything that ails us.
Senator, I think we have time for 2 more
Okay,
questions.
sorry, I'll try to be more brief. I think we have time for more than 2 more questions.
We'll
A few more
We'll
questions.
let them know you're
Let's
running
see
a few
how it
minutes.
goes. No, I don't want to. I can't run late. That's the only
I
thing.
understand, you bet. Gwen DeMuth is up, followed by Stephanie Rose, and then we'll go one at a time after that. Senator, we'll see how much time you have left.
All right. Sorry.
Gwen DeMuth.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for being here.
It's a wonderful opportunity. And my issue is really about the environment and protecting our water, air, and climate change. But I'll say zigzag a little bit and ask about your, I don't think we've brought this up yet, sort of the Russian interference
Sure.
in this election, and maybe you can speak to us.
It's a great question. So we need a full investigation of this, and if the congressional committees that are charged with this, like the Intelligence Committee, if they do a full investigation, if Democrats and Republicans put their differences aside, they do it, that's fine with me. But I've also said that if they won't, we need a special prosecutor who can look at this. We need an independent investigation, an independent set of eyes. The question that we have now is not whether or not the Russians interfered in a material way. Let me strike the word material. Whether the Russians interfered in a significant way in our presidential election. They did. And I have since met with ambassadors from European countries who have described for me what the Russians are doing in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, to try to create problems in the fabric of the EU and NATO and in these European countries. And so so the first thing is we need to do the investigation. And I will withhold judgment, obviously, until the investigation is concluded about whether or not what the role was, if there was any that the Trump administration campaign played. We don't know. We don't know. People say they know, don't know. We don't know. But here's what and so I'm worried about that. We should worry about that. I feel like this is kind of rolled off people's shoulders, and the idea that a foreign power is interfering with our political system. And by the way, these people who say, well, because they didn't hack into the voting machines themselves means they didn't actually have an effect on the election. That's ridiculous. If you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in media that you've bought to influence, or if you got 1,000 people sitting in a room, in a building in Moscow, banging on our internet so that people are having to read stuff that's not true about presidential candidates, who knows how that affects the outcome. So I would say we got to get to the bottom of it, and this is much more important than partisan politics. This is about our democracy. The second thing is about this, I cannot figure out our president's position here. I cannot figure it out because he's going around telling people, his people don't say this. Like his defense secretary, for whom I voted, doesn't say this. His UN ambassador, for whom I voted, doesn't say this. But he says this. He goes around and he says, NATO is obsolete. The EU is a catastrophe. The European Union. And look, Yeltsin, I'm dating myself. Putin, he's probably not about to invade Western Europe. But are his interests served by having a weak NATO? You better believe it. Are his interests served by having a weak EU? You better believe it. Did they interfere in Brexit and in these other elections as a way of trying to destabilize the governing effect that our allies have on their encroachment on particularly the Balkan states? You better believe it. And you better also believe they're going to see this as an opportunity for them to meddle if we don't take a hard line here. Look what's happened, in Syria, where the Russians helped create an unbelievably destabilized position and create a refugee crisis, and helped create immigrants that have streamed into Europe, changing European politics maybe forever, but at least for the present. And there are these parties, some of whom are Russian supported, that are rising up in Europe that are saying we should get out of the EU, that we should go it alone. And I guess they can make those decisions for themselves, but that is not good for the United States of America. It isn't. And I think his generals understand it. I think the people he's appointed to lead the Defense Department understand it. The place where I started to worry about this was during the campaign when he started to say, well, why is it a bad thing if Putin likes me? Or if we like each other? To which I say, as an American citizen, that question is irrelevant to me. I am not interested in whether you and Putin like each other. I'm interested in whether you are negotiating on behalf of the United States of America and our allies. Sure.
Another one, Stephanie Rose.
Good.
Just go ahead, Stephanie. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to say thank you so much for physically being here. It's great to have a conversation with your constituents. I do have a question that has not come up, though. And based on your statement, even that a lot of the work is done for the greater good. I'm an educator. Greater in and of itself is superlative, which means there's always a group of people that are not covered in that statement. Right now, we have an Attorney General by the name of Jeff Sessions, who clearly does not have a regard for civil rights.
That's not true.
We have a body, a legislation, or an administration that has blatantly articulated contradictory statements about the judiciary. There is an administration that is one-sided and biased in the way that we think about public safety.
I'm listening.
Absolutely. What, as congressional representative, as senator, do you do for the lives of people on the ground every day in this state that are not mattering? For the and has an administration that is willing to just write it off.
Yeah.
When there's federal data, there's federal reports that articulate that our justice system is an injustice system.
Yeah. So I'm not going to get this order exactly right, but there is an order of actions that have happened since the election. There was somebody who confused school choice with segregation, or segregation with school choice. There were all these cases that the Department of Justice was involved with that were voting rights cases, where now the Department of Justice is on the other side. This is what happens when you have elections. I mean, they have consequences. And there are cases that are involving school desegregation in various places in this country where the Justice Department intervened on the side of the plaintiffs, and now they are likely to be flipping over. So you're right, there's a big change here. And I think what we need to do is make sure that, that we continue to push on all of this stuff, and we don't fall for the idea that this all has to be partisan. And again, I beat that drum because I think where you're coming from is on the side, again, of what is traditional American politics and traditional American values. And the reason the Justice Department there is to protect people who can't protect themselves. The reason the federal government is involved in education, I can say this as a former educator myself, there's no reason for them to be there at all. There's nobody in Washington who's ever going to tell us how to teach a kid well. I guarantee you that. There's nobody in Washington who's ever going to tell us how to produce a good school lunch or train a principal or make sure parents feel safe in their schools. There's nobody there that's going to be able to do that. What they can do is make sure that we are fulfilling the civil rights responsibility that we have when it comes to public education, and that's why they're supposed to be there. And I think you are reasonable to expect us, that are, those of us in the legislature, to provide oversight during this challenging time when it's moving the other direction. In the meantime, look, I said over and over again, and I was wrong during the campaign, that I didn't think somebody who took the view that he's taken of the pluralism in our society, or the fact that we are a nation of immigrants and all that stuff, could get elected president. I was wrong, and he is our president. I was wrong about that. But that doesn't mean that we can't continue to assert those values. And in fact, I think we need to assert those values more than ever before to make sure that people in our communities and in our schools, kids, somebody mentioned to me this morning, I've had numerous people talk to me about what's going on in schools and I'm not blaming anybody for that. What I'm saying is it's up to all of us to set an example that's needed now on these issues. So thank you. I'm going to take one more and get out of your hair. If there is one more, and then I'll just get out of your hair.
There's 37 more. We'll just pick one off the top. Max Ferreira. Max Ferreira.
Senator, so I'm obviously not a senior.
Okay, when Max is done, I'm going to take a random person from this side of the room. So then I'm going to go.
So I'm not a senior. I don't take prescription drugs, but one of the first votes in the Senate this year was on your voting no to allow seniors to buy prescription drugs at a cheaper price from Canada. According to your Senate filings, your campaign took $531,000 from Big Pharma. When I contacted your office about why you voted no on that, the reasons that I got were literally word for word from the Big Pharma's own talking points on your website. Your stated reason that you voted no on it was you don't know, we can't ascertain the safety of Canadian drugs. If that's true, where are the dead Canadians? And are you giving up $530,000 to charity? Because it clearly seems like if someone gave me $500,000 to run for office, I'd be kind of in their pocket to vote for their interests.
Well, I stand by my voting record, including this vote, and I don't appreciate the implication of your question, but I appreciate your First Amendment right to come here and say whatever it is you want to say. I worked extremely hard over a number of years with a guy named Richard Burr, who's a Republican from North Carolina, to, it may surprise you to learn, to create what's called a track and trace system for drugs in this country. Up until that point, and by the way, this isn't going to be fully implemented until 2025 or 2027, up until that point, in the United States, you mentioned somebody back here, safe food. So if you get sick from drinking milk that's bad, there's a barcode on the gallon of milk that tells you where it came from, where it was sold, and ultimately where it was produced. We have no such thing when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So from the time the pharmaceuticals are manufactured until the time they get to your medicine cabinet, we can't track them. And the reality is there is a huge amount of tampering with our drug supply system. There is a huge amount of theft in our drug supply system. And why that's dangerous is that there are drugs that need to be refrigerated for them to continue to be able to do what they do. So, and by the way, that was not a law that I worked hard with pharma on. That was a law that I worked hard with the Pew Foundation, a lot of community organizations that were concerned, consumer groups concerned about how people were doing. We have no similar thing with respect to Canada. And there are many studies that have shown, and we'll send them to you. I mean, it's not pharma, it's other people. We'll send them to you. Studies that have shown that there is what is the word I'm looking for? Drug counterfeiting problem. That where a lot of the stuff is coming from countries like China and it's mislabeled. Same problem that we have. So we got to fix that. And actually, Bernie, in his newer version of this, his argument to me was, Michael, if we can transport vegetables across the border, why can't we transport drugs about them? That's what he said to me. And I said, I have an answer for that. And he said, okay. And so he's working on his bill. The bigger point I would make about this, which I made at the outset, I'm not sure whether you were here or not, is a much more useful way of getting lower cost drugs to people would be allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of the American people. I mean, the idea that the Canadian system is set up, it's a single payer system, as you know, and the government buys all the medicine, as you know, and they set a price point for the number of, doses that are going to be sold. That's the economic deal. It is totally implausible to me that first of all, that economic deal would stand up to a project where we said the American people are now going to buy those drugs from Canada, and the prices are going to remain the same. There's no way that would stay the same. And second, it strikes me as just not as useful and transparent as saying, let's negotiate these prices here. Let's have a system in America that actually provides us with drugs that are at a reasonable price. And I hope over time we can get there. So there's my answer. I don't know if any of that was on anybody else's website, but those are the reasons why I voted the way that I did. And I'm glad. I'm actually glad to have had the chance to end on that note, unless there's is there one last burning thing?
You open the door on
Okay, here's what we're doing. I got to be out of here in 5 minutes, so we're going to take you four in order to go ahead, but very quickly, okay? And these guys, there are other people here who are going to get mad because they got jobs to go back to. Thanks for having me.
I would like to say there's 3 people sitting in the Oval Office that scare me to death. And it looks like they're running the country. And my children's country and my grandchildren's country. You've got the President of the United States, you've got Steve Bannon, and you've got the 31-year-old son-in-law. Looks like they're in a vacuum. Tell me why I shouldn't be scared of this or relieve my anxiety.
I can't. I will relieve your anxiety by saying that our republic will survive all of this. Our republic will thrive. We have big disagreements in this last election. We should not be governed. Look, one of the things I say to people all the time, especially like the interns that are in my office, I say to them, anybody can come to Washington, a senator or an intern, and repeat the talking points they heard the night before on the cable television, on Fox or MSNBC or wherever it is. The websites that are all out there that are, anybody can do that, but it's not leadership, right? And it's not going to get us where we need to be. And I think we got to keep pushing. One of the things that I really worry about, so I'm not going to create more terror here. One of the things I really worry about is you can't run the government from the Oval Office with 3 people. There are all the agencies out there that need people to actually run the agencies, and for a variety of reasons, you can use your imagination, they're having a hard time finding people that will be in those agencies. And when you're doing things like suggesting that you're going to cut the State Department by 30% when we've got all this complicated stuff around the world, and you say horrible, lousy things about foreign service officers and all the rest, you start to ask yourself, is that really going to make us safer? So, hang in there, is what I would say. Yes, and then up here, and then here, we're done.
I understand that the military part of our budget, discretionary budget, is about 50%. And the President proposed a 10% increase with no plan. And yet the Defense Department and the military has not received an audit in a very long time, if ever. What can Congress do to ensure that those monies are audited and we know where they're going?
Well, we need to make sure that we're continuously providing oversight. That's what the Armed Services Committee is supposed to do. That's what the relevant subcommittee, the Appropriations Committee, is supposed to do. And I think they will do it. I think they'll do it whether he gets the increase that he wants here or whether he doesn't, because every dollar that we spend there, is critical for us to think about. I want us to pause for a moment on the budget because it's. If I get hit by a bus leaving here and someone else gets to go to Pueblo to tell this story, I want you to tell this story, which is the operating budget of the United States government. Roughly 17% of it is domestic discretionary spending. 18% of it is defense. So you're right, it's 50% of the discretionary part. But it's only 35%, that whole part is only 35% of what we spend in our operating budget. The rest of it is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. And again, I don't think Democrats or Republicans do enough to try to make us pay attention to that. We need to pay attention to that because we have $19 trillion of debt on the balance sheet. We're not funding what we're taking in adequately. We don't have the revenue sources aligned with what we're spending. Oh, we could do that, but that's supposed to be our job as the Senate. And where people ask for the GAO to do an audit, they'll do the audit. Okay, 2 more and then we're done. One in the back and one here. Yes?
Oh, great. Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Andrea Diamond. I am a new resident to Colorado, so I am I also work with a local group called Colorado Springs Feminists. We have a male event on Saturday, so we'll be sending you some more postcards this upcoming week, so please look for them. But I'm here to ask, there's a lot of talk these days about restricting women's access to health care, and there are concerns that a lot of people have about maintaining women's reproductive rights. So my question to you is, how will you work to protect women's reproductive rights and access to health care against Republicans who seem intent on removing crucial financial support from organizations like Planned Parenthood?
Well, so here, I have a, if you're, where'd you move from, by the way?
Chicago, Illinois.
That's yeah. We understand, she said. I'm not going to say that. We're happy to have you here. And if you look at my record, you'll see that I've got a very, very strong record protecting what you're talking about. I think people, certainly I've traveled around our state a lot. I know that people have heartfelt views on every side of this issue, but I would say that I think there is a significant consensus of Coloradans who believe that women should be making these decisions in consultation with their doctors and not the federal government. And I'm going to defend that. I'll also say that I have strongly supported Planned Parenthood because of a lot of places in this country, it's the only access that people have who have a certain amount of money and may not have insurance. And there are, because of policies at the state level, places in America where it's impossible for women to get reproductive health care now, and that is in the United States of America in 2017. I have a friend named John Tester, he is a friend from Montana. I love the guy. He's a senator, he's up for re-election this year, and he says, the way he describes this is, my daughter is having to fight for things that my wife and her mother never had to fight for because her grandmother had already won those battles. And so one of the big things about the Affordable Care Act was that it stopped for the first time the idea that being a woman should in and of itself be a pre-existing condition. And no matter what we do with our healthcare system going forward, I hope that's a principle we can all agree ought to underlie anything we should do in our healthcare system.
To clarify, I think that there are there's a specifically pointed attack going on now. So I would like to know how.
Well, let me tell you, first of all, I have helped lead the fight against the pointed attacks before. I'll lead the fact now. I'm not going to disagree with you except to say that pointed attack has been happening for the 8 years that I've been in the United States Senate. I mean, when I ran the first time, people said, well, why are you running ads on this issue? Nobody's going to try to take these rights away. And I got back there, and the first thing that the House did, the very first bill they ran, was on this subject. And for some reason, they can't leave it alone. It just keeps getting added to bills that have nothing to do with women's health care. So I'll let you judge me by my record. And this is the last word, sir.
Okay, last one. I got a hard stop.
I know I'm going to be in real trouble.
You
here.
are already.
Okay, we got to go.
Election integrity, Russian interference, fake news, Comey interference. How do we get a special prosecutor when they are created by the president or the attorney general, who are the very people who need to be investigated?
There are people are going to have to live. It's hard. It's always a challenge. It's a great question, and we live in a democracy, and you're not going to expect people to do it on their own. And that's they need you to hear your voices on this. And it's a natural inclination for the people that are in the same party as the president to say, we're going to be protected. We're going to be protected. But as facts come out in these investigations, you're going to see people that change their mind. And they're not monolithic on this question either. There are some Republicans that have called for a special prosecutor as well. I've learned in D.C. that nothing ever happens on my time frame. Ever. But if you keep pushing, you can make a difference. I really got to go. So let me... Thank you to all of you. See you later. I got a little formal. Thank you.
I'm Eric Singer, live on our Gazette News Facebook platform. What you've been watching just moments ago is Senator Michael Bennet, a Democrat from Washington, representing Colorado, coming here to talk to his constituents. And this was a mostly congenial crowd, mostly Democrats, but there were others who were not so demonstrably affectionate. Commissioner Longinos Gonzalez, thank you so much for being here. So,
You're welcome.
all right, many times you were grimacing as some of the answers were being given by Senator Bennet. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was appreciative of Senator Bennet coming out to talk to the community. I kind of failed to see some direct answers or new ideas. A lot of his answers were largely, well, I'm going to oppose President Trump's initiatives or Republican initiatives versus giving out any new ideas.
What idea would you have liked to have heard?
Well, in one example, he acknowledged that Obamacare in the state of Colorado has resulted in increased costs. Medicaid expansion is a good example of going from about 20% to 40% and increasing. And he acknowledges that is cutting into the state's ability to fund projects like higher education, which he specifically mentioned, as well as infrastructure and roads. But he couldn't provide any new ideas outside of saying he would oppose the current proposal by the Republican Congress without coming out with any new ideas on that.
The one thing he did say was that he would be willing to work with those with R's in front of their name and those who he disagrees with. Does that give you hope to see that there be a more conciliatory mood in Washington?
Well, I always hope that people can come together and agree on good ideas. He acknowledged that what we've seen with Obamacare is negatively affecting our budget. So I just think he's had several years to come up with these ideas and reach across. Now that President Trump is and the Republican Congress is coming up with ideas, I hope he's willing to listen to those ideas.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
El Paso County Commissioner Longino Gonzalez talking with us a little bit. The lone detractor here in a mostly congenial Democratic crowd, listening to a town hall with Senator Michael Bennet. And thank you for watching. You've been watching on our Gazette News Facebook platform. I'm Eric Singer. Of course, we'll have full coverage in the Gazette and on Gazette.com. Our own Rachel Riley is writing a story right now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on our Gazette Facebook News platform.